say thank you for having been a part of this sermon series and continuing to come and to listen. I'd say at times it's been interesting. I'd say at times it's been challenging. But my hope is, and my hope from the beginning was, that it could simply introduce some different ways of looking at the Scriptures, that we might not be so rigid in the way that we approach things, that we might seek other ways to understand. And so I hope that this week and next week, as we wrap up the sermon series, that you'll continue to work through those things during the week, and you'll continue to hear the words in the way that they're presented. Now, I'm not certain when the first time I saw pig wrestling was, but I remember it was something I had absolutely no desire to do. Mud flying everywhere. Mud getting everywhere. Honestly, I am not a fan of mud. But the idea appeals to some people. And as far as county fairs go across the land, you'll find great pits of earth turned, filled with water, churned into a gooey, sloppy milkshake of terra not so firma. Often, it is children who do the dirty work, sloshing around in the pit, trying to get their handle on an animal that makes its home in this inhospitable environment. The rules of the game are simple. Now, they do vary a little bit on the venue, but they're pretty much the same. While some contests use larger pigs, others use smaller ones, and some have a single pig, while others use more than one. But the pigs are generally coated with shortening vegetable oil or some other lubricant. And the contestants chase the pigs around in the mud with the hope that they will catch one. Now, depending on the contest, they either try to get one or both hands on the pig, tackle the pig, hold the pig down, or be able to pick it up and carry it to a set point. There may be several rounds during a contest, and the prize is often the pig himself. Now, children who are too young to compete in true pig wrestling may compete in a grease pig contest, the object of which is to hang on to a grease pig for a certain amount of time. Usually a juvenile pig is used for this particular competition. Now, as I said, I've never competed in these revelries, but I have witnessed a few. And I can say that whether they catch the pig or not, people seem to enjoy the effort. As George Bernard Shaw once said about pig wrestling, you end up money, the pig enjoys it. Engaging in postmodern thought, which is what we're going to talk about this morning, postmodern theology, and postmodern expressions of Christianity are kind of like pig wrestling. Most people never quite catch it. Definitions are slippery. The logic is slippery. The thinkers and the theologians often talk in vague generalities or microscopic specifics that are too difficult to understand and even more difficult to explain if you do understand them. Yes, I have found these questions to be difficult, but I find that often from this kind of study there arises something worthwhile. This approach to theology can quite often be enlightening. So, to look through this lens, as we've been doing with the others, we're going to look at this idea of postmodern thought and Christianity in general. Then we're going to do as we have done and try to make an attempt at delving into a specific area. We'll define it, and then we'll unpack it, and hopefully, when we come to the time at the end of the sermon, we'll be able to apply it in a way that's useful. Postmodernism means different things in different contexts. It's a critique of claims to knowledge. In other words, postmodernism is a movement of resistance, a way of defining itself against modern thought or the philosophies of the Enlightenment. In a sense, it's a way of questioning the way that we think and the assumptions we have. a way of questioning what we call truth by examining language and the way we use it. For example, English philosopher Thomas Hobbes once noted, "To say that God hath spoken to him in a dream is no more than to say he dreamed that God spoke to him." Now, what Hobbes is trying to say in this is that the perspective you bring with you and the way you express that perspective is the truth for you. Looking at this one way, a divine presence is directly communicating with a person. And if you look at it another way, the person is dreaming about a divine presence communicating with them. One is saying there's a direct message being given. The other one is saying that there's an assumption of a message there. It's a way to say that truth has a certain amount of relativity, and it's relative to the person who is seeing it or speaking it. For instance, if you stand in front of your car and the front of the car is in pristine condition, the paint just like it was new, no blemishes, freshly washed, it's a good car. But if you're looking at it from the rear of the car, which has been in a recent accident, and the lift gate's all smashed up, and the glass is falling out, it might not be as good a car. For that matter, you could stand at the driver's side and look toward the front and think it's good, look toward the back and think it's not so much. All from standing in the same position. Postmodernism says your viewpoint is largely a perspective, and that perspective is the total of your experience and your chosen ideology. Now, all of this is experiential. It has to do with the life that you've lived and the things that have happened to you and how you process those things, how you've come to accept or not accept those things. Leonard Sweet writes that postmoderns will do most anything not to lose their connection with the experience of life. Now, consider some of the great technological advancements in communications during the postmodern age. The cellular phone, email, digital messaging services, and most recently social media platforms. All of these advancements have allowed this sense of connection to flourish. And yet, not so much. A good postmodern would have to question whether this is real communication or simply the illusion of communication, a false sense of being brought together by anonymous technology, a way of being someone other than ourselves. So what happens when we take these critiques, when we take these viewpoints of questioning, especially that aspect of it, of questioning, and we apply it to the Bible with a critical, questioning lens? Well, John chapter 20 brings us to a triumphal part of the gospel story. He was dead and is alive again, and we have seen it. One theologian specifically refers to the resurrection event as the central Christian event and symbol. It is symbolic of the dawn of a new day in the life of humanity. For with the resurrection of Christ, a new consciousness comes into the world. In this chapter, we have 4 stories about resurrection perspectives, centered on major characters in the gospel records: Mary Magdalene, Peter and John, the disciples without Thomas, and the disciples with Thomas. Now, in our first story, Mary Magdalene, a woman whom biblical history has unjustly vilified, comes to the tomb on Sunday morning. She finds the tomb empty and concludes that they have taken the Lord from the tomb. We don't know where they put him. After telling Peter and John about the missing body, she finds herself sitting outside the tomb crying, her grief deep and painfully real. Suddenly she sees angels and repeats to them the same words that she said to Peter and John. The angels don't respond, but a man appears who Mary assumes is the gardener, and who has taken the body away, and she starts pleading with him for Jesus' body. When Mary realizes that it's the resurrected Jesus, she reaches out to him. And he says, "Don't hold on to me, for I haven't gone to my Father. Go to my brothers and sisters and tell them, I'm going up to my Father, your Father, my God and your God." Now, in the second story, a story that's kind of interspersed within Mary's story, Peter and John hear from Mary that the body is missing. The grave clothes are empty. They run to the tomb. The body is gone. They return to the others. Pretty simple, pretty cut and dry. Third story finds the disciples, minus Thomas, waiting in a hidden room to avoid the Jewish authorities for fear of being arrested and tried like Jesus. Jesus appears to them, bids them peace, and the writer John says, "Peace be with you. As the Father sent me, I am sending you." Then he breathes on them and says, "Receive the Holy Spirit. If you forgive anyone's sins, they're forgiven. If you don't forgive them, they aren't forgiven." Now the fourth story is similar to the third, with one exception. The exception that Thomas is present. In one of the more famous episodes of Scripture, Thomas declares that unless he sees the nail marks in his hands and puts his finger in the wounds left by the nails and puts his hand into his side, he won't believe. But Jesus appears and the conversation goes something like this. Jesus says, "Peace be with you." And he says to Thomas, "Put your fingers here. Look at my hands. Put your hand here at my side." No more disbelief. You believe. Then Jesus says, "My Lord and my God." Thomas says, "My Lord, my God." And Jesus says, "Do you believe because you saw me? Happy are those who don't see and yet believe." Then Jesus did other things, miraculous signs and wonders. And in all of these stories, we have common elements. Jesus is there, but he's not there. There is belief and there is disbelief. There is a sense of awe and wonder, and there's a sense of shock. There are definitive theological statements being made about all of these things. Now, from a postmodern perspective, the question in and under the text is about the idea of spiritual life, of someone continuing spiritually after their death. The perspective of literalism or fundamentalism is that these are factual, historical events that happened exactly as they are written, as though you would have been a fly on the wall and seen the events exactly as recorded. In other words, they would see it as though the AP and Reuters newswire sent a reporter, and the reporter was standing there going, "Okay, and John and Peter ran, and they got to the tomb, and hang on, can I get a quote from you, Peter? Can I quote you on that? That's the way that they understand it. Another perspective, however, is to consider the words and their meanings as metaphorical or allegorical. The church father St. Augustine notes that all teaching is teaching of either things or signs, but things are learned through signs. And what he meant by signs was, he meant that they were symbolic. He goes on to note that physical things in the real world, like logs and sheep, are simply things, while something like the log Moses threw into the bitter waters to remove their bitterness, or the sheep that Abraham sacrificed in Isaac's place, are symbolic of something else. Postmodern thought would want to know about resurrection as a metaphor or a sign for something else. Perhaps a rejuvenation of life or rebirth of the self. They might see that resurrection is not physical, but it's real. Meaning that resurrection frees us from the need to cling to the physical. Resurrection reveals life that cannot be bound by a tomb or the grave clothes in which the body's been wrapped. Resurrection is an invitation to step into the life of the transforming Spirit. And the ultimate blessing of resurrection comes to those who do not see physical evidence, and yet who believe. It is a spiritual transformation from being dead in spirit and brought to life in the way of Jesus, and not a physical event bound by time and space, or bound to a place. So that is our basic explanation and our invitation to connect and practice a little postmodern thought.